I'm Marcus Chen, 47, and after 25 years as Senior Network Administrator at Pinnacle Financial, I thought I was untouchable. Last Tuesday, my smug 28-year-old boss called me into his office with a termination letter claiming budget cuts while I watched through the window as they moved my replacement into my parking spot. What they didn't know was that I had designed every single security protocol, backup system, and network pathway in their $2 billion operation. As I packed my box of personal items, I realized they had just made the biggest mistake of their corporate lives. The termination letter in my hands felt like paper, but it represented so much more. It was the catalyst that would transform me from loyal employee to strategic adversary. 25 years of dedication, innovation, and irreplaceable expertise, dismissed with a single signature. Before we jump back in, tell me where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Let me take you back to where it all began. It was September 1999, and I was a 22-year-old computer science graduate with more ambition than experience. Pinnacle Financial was just a mid-sized regional bank then, nothing like the financial powerhouse they'd become. I still remember walking into that cramped IT closet they called the technology department. Just me, 2 ancient servers, and a prayer that nothing would crash during business hours. My original employment contract from 1999 sits in my home office now, yellowed at the edges but still readable. Back then, I signed it with such hope, such trust in the company's promise of growth and opportunity. The starting salary was modest, $32,000 a year, but they assured me there was room for advancement for someone willing to work hard and innovate. Those first few years were a whirlwind of 16-hour days and weekend emergency calls. I was essentially building their entire network infrastructure from scratch. When I started, they had maybe 50 employees sharing 3 dial-up internet connections and a handful of outdated computers that crashed if you looked at them wrong. Email was a luxury, and most communication still happened through internal memos and fax machines. I threw myself into the work with the enthusiasm only a young professional can muster. Every challenge was an opportunity to prove myself. When the servers crashed during month-end processing, I stayed up all night rebuilding databases by hand. When they needed to connect their 3 branch offices, I researched and implemented the company's first wide-area network. When Y2K concerns had other banks panicking, I spent months ensuring our systems would transition smoothly into the new millennium. The recognition came slowly at first. A pat on the back from the branch manager when I fixed a critical system failure. A small bonus when my network upgrades increased productivity by 40%. But it was enough to fuel my dedication. I wasn't just fixing computers. I was building the technological foundation that would support the company's growth for decades to come. By 2003, Pinnacle had grown to over 200 employees across 5 locations, and I had been promoted twice. I was no longer the junior IT guy. I was the network systems specialist and later the IT operations manager. The company Christmas party that year was where I met Sarah, the new marketing coordinator with the infectious laugh and genuine interest in understanding how technology could improve customer service. Sarah and I connected immediately. She was one of the few people who actually listened when I explained how the network functioned, who appreciated the complexity of keeping hundreds of users connected and productive. Our first date was technically a work discussion over coffee about implementing a new customer relationship management system, but by the end of it, we both knew this was about more than databases and user interfaces. As the company expanded, so did my responsibilities and expertise. I designed custom security protocols that protected customer financial data years before such measures became industry standard. I implemented redundant backup systems that prevented data loss during multiple hardware failures. I trained every new IT hire, sharing not just technical knowledge but the company culture of innovation and reliability. The infrastructure I built wasn't just functional, it was elegant. Each system component was carefully planned and integrated with the others. I documented everything meticulously, creating comprehensive guides and troubleshooting manuals that would serve the company for years. What others saw as just computers and cables, I saw as a carefully orchestrated symphony of technology, working in perfect harmony. By 2005, I had established myself as indispensable to operations. The company had grown to nearly 500 employees, and every single one of them depended on the systems I had designed and maintained. When senior management needed to make technology decisions, they came to me. When clients had questions about data security and system reliability, They wanted to hear from me personally. The years from 2006 to 2015 were what I now think of as the golden years, both for Pinnacle Financial and for my career. I had been promoted to Senior Network Administrator, a title that finally reflected the scope of my responsibilities. The company newsletter even featured me in their employee spotlight section, calling me our tech wizard, and crediting my innovations with saving the company millions in potential security breaches and system downtime. That newsletter article hangs framed in my home office now, a bittersweet reminder of when my contributions were not just recognized but celebrated. In it, CEO Thomas Pinnacle himself was quoted saying, "Marcus Chen is the backbone of our technological infrastructure. His forward-thinking approach to network security and system integration has positioned us years ahead of our competitors." During this period, I designed and implemented what became known industry-wide as the Pinnacle Protocol, a revolutionary security framework that protected financial data through multiple layers of encryption and access control. Other banks actually tried to headhunt me to learn our methods, but I was loyal to Pinnacle. This was my company, my family, and I was building something that would last. The technical achievement I'm most proud of from this era was the implementation of our disaster recovery system. In 2008, when the financial crisis hit and banks across the country were struggling with system failures and data losses, Pinnacle weathered the storm without a single minute of downtime, while our competitors were scrambling to recover lost transactions and customer data. Our systems continued operating flawlessly. My personal life was flourishing too. Sarah and I married in 2007, and she often joked that she had to compete with servers and network switches for my attention. But she understood my passion for the work, especially when she saw how the company's growth was directly tied to the infrastructure I had built. We bought our first house in 2008, a beautiful colonial in the suburbs with a home office where I could work on system designs and documentation. Our first child, Emma, was born in 2009, followed by our son Jake in 2012. I was determined to be present for my family while still maintaining the high standards that had made me indispensable at work. The company was understanding about family obligations, and I had earned enough trust and respect that I could manage my schedule flexibly as long as the systems ran smoothly. And they did run smoothly. Pinnacle Financial grew from a regional bank to a major player in the financial services industry, expanding to 15 locations across 3 states. Every branch, every new service, every technological advancement was built on the foundation I had created. When they launched online banking, it was my security protocols that protected customer data. When they introduced mobile banking apps, it was my network architecture that ensured reliable connectivity. The company's explosive growth was a testament to the stability and scalability of the systems I had designed. Revenue grew from $50 million annually in 2006 to over $300 million by 2015. They went public in 2013, and I remember the pride I felt watching Thomas Pinnacle ring the opening bell at the stock exchange, knowing that my technological infrastructure was a key factor in their success. I trained dozens of new employees during these years, sharing my knowledge and ensuring that the IT department could function efficiently. I created comprehensive training programs and documentation that became the standard for the industry. Young technicians would often tell me that working under my guidance was like getting a master class in network administration and security. The respect I commanded during this period wasn't just internal. I spoke at industry conferences, published articles in trade magazines, and consulted with other financial institutions on security best practices. The Pinnacle Protocol became a case study in business schools, and I was frequently contacted by journalists writing about innovation in financial technology. But perhaps what I valued most during these golden years was the sense of belonging and purpose. I wasn't just an employee. I was a key architect of the company's success. My family was secure, my career was thriving, and I believed I had found my professional home for life. The first cracks in my professional paradise appeared in 2016 when Thomas Pinnacle announced his retirement and handed control of the company to his nephew, Derek Walsh. Derek was 26 years old, with an MBA from an expensive private school, and exactly zero experience in banking or technology. His appointment as CEO sent ripples of concern through the company, but I tried to remain optimistic. After all, I had nearly 2 decades of experience and a track record of success that spoke for itself. My annual performance review from that first year under Derek's leadership should have been a red flag, but I was too trusting to see it clearly. Then, the document sits in my files now, a stark contrast to the glowing reviews I had received for years. Where previous evaluations praised my innovation and leadership, this one contained subtle criticisms about resistance to new ideas and difficulty adapting to modern management styles. The scores were still good, mostly 4s and 5s out of 5, but the narrative comments were troubling. Derek had written that while my technical skills were adequate, the company needed to embrace fresh perspectives and contemporary approaches to technology management. This from someone who had asked me during our first meeting whether our servers ran on the cloud or the regular internet. The warning signs became more obvious as 2017 progressed. Derek began hiring young employees, recent graduates with impressive degrees but limited real-world experience, at salaries that exceeded what I had earned after 5 years with the company. These new hires were brought in as digital innovation specialists and network modernization consultants, titles that sounded impressive but seemed to have no clear job descriptions. During team meetings, I watched Derek's eyes glaze over when I explained technical details or presented data on system performance. Instead, he gravitated toward the younger employees who spoke in buzzwords about disruptive technologies, agile frameworks, and cloud-native solutions. Never mind that most of these concepts were either already implemented in our systems or completely inappropriate for a financial institution with strict regulatory requirements. The most frustrating part was watching my ideas being dismissed or, worse, stolen and rebranded. I would propose a system upgrade in a meeting, only to have Derek interrupt and say we needed to think outside the box and leverage younger minds. 2 weeks later, one of his new hires would present my exact idea as their own innovation, complete with flashy PowerPoint presentations and management consulting terminology. I tried to document these instances, keeping detailed notes of meetings and email threads. I forwarded my original proposals to my personal email account, time-stamped and documented. Something in my gut told me I might need this evidence someday, though I couldn't have imagined how prescient that instinct would prove to be. The age. Discrimination wasn't subtle once you knew to look for it. Comments about bringing fresh energy to the team and modernizing our approach were always accompanied by pointed looks in my direction. Derek would make jokes about old-school thinking and the need to upgrade our human resources along with our technology. The other senior employees began experiencing similar treatment, and several longtime managers were restructured out of their positions. What really stung was the systematic erosion of my authority. Decisions that had always been mine to make. Server upgrades, security protocol updates, vendor selections, suddenly required approval from Derek's Innovation Committee. This committee consisted primarily of the new hires, none of whom had the experience to understand the implications of the choices they were making. I watched in horror as they approved inferior equipment purchases to save money, ignored critical security updates because they weren't user-friendly, and implemented trendy software solutions that created vulnerabilities in our carefully designed systems. When I raised concerns, I was told I was being overly cautious and resistant to change. The final straw in this pattern came during my 2018 performance review. Despite another year of flawless system performance and zero security incidents, my scores had dropped to mostly 3s with several 2s. The comments were harsh and seemingly designed to create a paper trail. Derek wrote that I struggled to adapt to new leadership styles, showed reluctance to embrace innovative solutions, and demonstrated concerning inflexibility in collaborative environments. I knew then that they were building a case against me, but I still believed that my technical expertise and the company's dependence on my knowledge would protect me. I had designed every critical system they used. I knew every vulnerability, every workaround, every optimization that kept their operation running smoothly. Surely they wouldn't be foolish enough to lose that institutional knowledge. Looking back, I realize I was naive about corporate politics and the power of personal vendettas. I had spent so many years focused on technical excellence that I had failed to recognize the importance of perception and political maneuvering in the new corporate culture Derek was creating. By 2019, Derek's campaign to undermine my credibility had become systematic and ruthless. What I discovered later through a friend in the IT department who forwarded me internal emails was that Derek had been building a case against me for months. The surveillance email thread he accidentally copied me on revealed the calculated nature of his plan to remove me from the company. In one email to HR Director Jennifer Mills, Derek wrote, "Marcus represents the old guard thinking that's holding us back. His resistance to modernization initiatives is becoming a liability. We need to document performance issues and begin transition planning. Another message to his assistant instructed her to schedule Marcus for all early morning meetings and late afternoon sessions to create schedule conflicts that demonstrate inflexibility. The setup was methodical and professional, designed to make my termination appear justified and legally defensible. Derek began assigning me to projects that were set up to fail, impossible timelines, insufficient resources, and conflicting requirements that would make success unlikely, regardless of my technical skills. When I raised concerns about these project parameters, my objections were documented as negative attitudes toward challenging assignments. False complaints began appearing in my personnel file. Users would report system issues that were actually the result of the inferior equipment Derek's committee had approved, but the problems were attributed to my outdated management methods. When I demonstrated that the issues were hardware-related and could be fixed with proper equipment upgrades, I was accused of blaming others and deflecting responsibility. The most insidious part of the setup was how Derek began restricting my access to systems and information. Security clearances that I had held for decades were suddenly under review for compliance purposes. I was excluded from strategic planning. Meetings about technology upgrades then criticized for being out of touch with the company's direction. Database access permissions that I needed to perform my job were reduced without explanation, forcing me to request help from junior staff members for tasks I had been handling independently for years. I tried to document everything that was happening, but the isolation made it difficult to gather evidence. Meetings I had previously been included in were now held without me. Email chains that I should have been part of were mysteriously missing my name. When I asked to be included, I was told that the meetings were strategic-level discussions that didn't require my input. The gaslighting was perhaps the most psychologically damaging aspect of the entire process. When I pointed out inconsistencies in project requirements or questioned decisions that violated our established security protocols, Derek would express concern about my attention to detail and suggest that I might be overwhelmed by the complexity of modern systems. He would speak to me in meetings using a condescending tone that implied I was confused or mistaken about facts I knew to be absolutely accurate. My attempts to push back or defend myself were systematically documented as evidence of poor performance. When I provided data showing that our system performance had actually improved under my management, Derek dismissed the metrics as traditional measurements that don't capture user experience. When I demonstrated that proposed changes would create security vulnerabilities, I was accused of fear-mongering and obstructing progress. The final phase of the setup involved hiring my replacement while I was still employed. They brought in Kevin Morrison, a 29-year-old with impressive credentials on paper but limited experience with the specific systems I had designed. Kevin was given the title Director of Technology Innovation and a salary that was 40% higher than mine, despite having no experience with our industry or regulatory requirements. What made this particularly galling was that I was assigned to train Kevin on our systems while being told that his role was complementary to mine, not a replacement. I spent weeks showing him the intricacies of our network architecture, security protocols, and disaster recovery procedures. Kevin was intelligent and asked good questions, but it was clear that he was learning systems that had taken me decades to design and perfect. During the training process, I began to suspect that Kevin was documenting everything with unusual thoroughness. He recorded our sessions, took detailed notes, and asked for copies of documentation that went far beyond what would be necessary for a complementary role. When I mentioned this to Derek, I was told that Kevin was simply being thorough and professional, and that I should appreciate having someone so engaged in learning from my experience. The writing was on the wall, but I still couldn't quite believe they would actually terminate someone with my experience and institutional knowledge. The systems I had built were not just technical implementations. They were customized solutions that required deep understanding of both the technology and the business processes they supported. Removing me would be like removing the architect's blueprints while the building was still under construction. But as I would soon learn, corporate arrogance and personal vendettas can override practical considerations, even when the consequences should have been obvious to anyone with basic business sense. The call came on a Tuesday morning in March 2024. Derek's assistant phoned to schedule an urgent meeting for 2 p.m. that afternoon. She wouldn't provide details, but something in her tone told me this wasn't about a routine project update. I spent the morning reviewing my recent work, preparing for what I assumed would be another performance discussion, or perhaps a new assignment designed to set me up for failure. Walking into Derek's corner office, I immediately noticed HR Director Jennifer Mills sitting beside his desk with a manila folder in front of her. The atmosphere was formal, cold, and purposeful. Derek didn't offer his usual fake smile or small talk about the weather. Instead, he gestured for me to sit while maintaining eye contact with an expression I can only describe as smug satisfaction. "Marcus," Derek began, "this is difficult, but we're making some organizational changes that will affect your position." Jennifer slid the manila folder across the desk to me. Inside was my termination letter, printed on company letterhead with official signatures and dated that very day. The stated reason was budgetary restructuring and operational efficiency improvements. I stared at the document, reading the same sentences multiple times as my brain struggled to process what was happening. 25 years of service, reduced to a form letter with generic corporate language about economic necessities and strategic realignment. The severance package outlined in the attached document was insulting. 6 weeks of pay plus healthcare coverage through the end of the month. "This is effective immediately," Derek continued, clearly enjoying the moment. "We appreciate your years of service, but the company needs to move in a new direction, with more contemporary approaches to technology management." The irony wasn't lost on me that he was firing the person who had designed every system that made his contemporary approaches possible. What happened next was perhaps the most humiliating part of the entire experience. While Derek and Jennifer were explaining the logistics of my departure, I happened to glance out the office window toward the parking lot. There, in my assigned parking spot, the one I had earned through years of seniority and performance, was a moving truck. 2 men were carrying boxes of equipment and personal items into the building. My replacement was literally moving into my workspace before I had even finished being fired. "You'll have 30 minutes to collect your personal items," Jennifer said, consulting her checklist with bureaucratic efficiency. "A security guard will escort you to ensure a smooth transition." The word escort made it clear this wasn't a courtesy. It was supervision to ensure I didn't steal anything or sabotage systems that I had designed and built. The severance package document Jennifer handed me was a masterpiece of corporate insult disguised as generosity. After 25 years of service, during which I had literally built the technological foundation of a multi-billion-dollar operation, they were offering me 6 weeks of pay and a promise to provide positive references for future employment opportunities. The non-compete clause, however, was ironclad and comprehensive, preventing me from working for any competitor or financial services company for 18 months. As I sat there processing the betrayal, Derek's phone rang. He answered with obvious pleasure. "Yes, Kevin, go ahead and start moving your equipment into Marcus's office. He's being briefed on the transition now." The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. They had planned this down to the minute, ensuring maximum psychological impact. The walk to my office, accompanied by a security guard named Tom, who had known me for years and looked genuinely uncomfortable with his assignment, felt like a death march. 25 years of accumulated knowledge, relationships, and memories reduced to whatever personal items I could fit in a cardboard box. My diplomas, family photos, the small cactus Sarah had given me for my desk. Suddenly these seemed like the only proof that I had ever mattered to this organization. Other employees tried not to stare as I packed my belongings under supervision, but I could feel their eyes and hear their whispered conversations. Some looked sympathetic, others appeared confused, and a few seemed relieved that they weren't the ones being escorted out. The unspoken message was clear. This could happen to anyone, so keep your head down and don't ask questions. The final indignity came at the building's exit, where Tom had to deactivate my security badge and collect my parking pass. The same badge I had carried for over 2 decades, which had granted me access to every system and secure area in the building, was now worthless plastic. The parking spot I had occupied for years would be reassigned before I reached my car. Driving home with my cardboard box of personal items in the passenger seat, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Shock at the suddenness and callousness of the termination, anger at the deliberate humiliation and disrespect. But underneath those immediate reactions, something else was building. A cold, calculating awareness of exactly what they had just done to themselves. They had just fired the one person who truly understood every critical system in their operation. The architect of their technological infrastructure was now sitting in his driveway, holding a severance package that didn't even cover 2 months. of his mortgage while they celebrated their modernization initiative. What they didn't realize was that this termination letter wasn't just the end of my employment. It was the beginning of their education about the true value of institutional knowledge and the dangerous consequences of corporate arrogance. The first few days after my termination were a blur of disbelief and practical concerns. Sarah took time off work to help me process what had happened, and we spent hours discussing our immediate financial situation and long-term plans. The inadequate severance package meant we had maybe 2 months before serious money problems would begin, assuming I could find employment quickly despite the restrictive non-compete clause. It was on the 4th day, while I was in my home office updating my resume and trying to figure out how to explain my sudden departure to potential employers, that I began to truly comprehend what Pinnacle Financial had done to themselves. Sitting in front of my computer, surrounded by boxes of technical documentation I had brought home over the years, I started reviewing the network architecture blueprints I had hand-drawn decades earlier. These weren't just any blueprints. They were the original design documents for every critical system pathway in Pinnacle's operation. Every server configuration, every security protocol, every backup procedure, every disaster recovery plan. All of it existed in its complete form only in my personal files. The company had copies of individual components and implementation guides, but the comprehensive understanding of how everything connected and why it was designed that way existed primarily in my head and in these documents. Looking at the detailed diagrams I had sketched by hand in the early 2000s, I realized that I hadn't just built Pinnacle's network infrastructure. I had created a custom, integrated system that was unlike anything else in the industry. Every pathway, every security layer, every redundancy measure had been carefully planned and implemented to work together as a seamless whole. It wasn't just a collection of computer equipment. It was a technological ecosystem that I had nurtured and evolved over 25 years. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. They hadn't just fired an employee. They had removed the architect while the building was still occupied. Kevin Morrison might be intelligent and technically competent, but he was learning to operate systems he hadn't designed and couldn't fully understand. The training I had provided him was comprehensive for basic operations, but it barely scratched the surface of the deeper knowledge required for true system mastery. I began methodically reviewing each component of the infrastructure, and the scope of my irreplaceability became increasingly clear. The custom security protocols I had developed weren't documented in any standard format, because they were unique solutions to Pinnacle's specific requirements. The backup systems operated on schedules and procedures that I had optimized over years of experience with the company's daily, weekly, and monthly operational cycles. Most critically, the disaster recovery procedures relied on a series of manual interventions and workarounds that I had never fully documented because they seemed so intuitive to me. These weren't shortcuts or poor practices. They were sophisticated solutions to complex problems that had emerged over years of system evolution, but they existed primarily in my institutional memory, not in any manual that Kevin or his team could reference. The network monitoring systems I had configured would alert the IT staff to problems, but interpreting those alerts and understanding their implications required deep knowledge of the underlying architecture. I had spent years learning to read the subtle patterns and correlations that indicated developing issues before they became critical failures. This kind of expertise couldn't be transferred through training sessions or documentation. It was the result of decades of hands-on experience with these specific systems. As I continued reviewing my files, I realized that I had unconsciously created multiple layers of dependency on my knowledge, not through malicious intent, but simply because I had been the person responsible for every major decision and implementation for 25 years. I was the human embodiment of Pinnacle's technological institutional memory. The most sobering realization came when I calculated the true scope of potential vulnerabilities. If even one critical system failed, and Kevin's team didn't understand the proper recovery procedures, the consequences could cascade through the entire network. Customer data could be compromised, financial transactions could be lost, regulatory compliance could be violated, and business operations could be disrupted for days or weeks. Sitting in my home office, surrounded by the blueprints of systems that powered a multi-billion-dollar operation, I understood for the first time the true magnitude of what had just happened. Pinnacle Financial had fired their technological foundation. They had dismissed the one person who truly understood how their digital infrastructure functioned, why it was designed the way it was, and how to maintain it properly. The irony was almost laughable. Derek Walsh had terminated me to modernize the company's approach to technology management, but in doing so, he had created the very kind of operational risk that modern corporations spend millions trying to avoid. They had essentially fired their own disaster recovery plan. For the first time since receiving that termination letter, I began to smile, not from happiness, but from the dawning realization that I held considerably more power in this situation than anyone at Pinnacle Financial understood. They thought they had eliminated a problem employee. In reality, they had just made themselves completely dependent on the goodwill of someone they had badly mistreated. Once I understood the scope of Pinnacle's dependency on my knowledge, I knew I needed to carefully research my legal position before taking any action. The stakes were too high for emotional responses or impulsive decisions. I had been burned by corporate politics once. I wasn't going to make the same mistake twice by acting without full understanding of the legal and practical implications. My first call was to Robert Chen, an employment attorney who specialized in wrongful termination cases. Robert and I weren't related despite sharing a surname, but he came highly recommended by a colleague who had used his services during a similar corporate restructuring. Our initial consultation was enlightening and concerning in equal measure. Robert's legal consultation notes, which he shared with me, painted a complex picture of my rights and vulnerabilities. The termination itself, while ethically questionable, was likely legal since I was an at-will employee, and they had documented performance concerns, regardless of how fabricated those concerns might have been. However, the age discrimination aspect was more promising, especially given the pattern of older employees being replaced by younger, less experienced workers. The challenge, Robert explained, is proving discriminatory intent versus legitimate business decisions. Derek documented performance issues and framed the termination as modernization, which gives them legal cover. However, if we can demonstrate a pattern of age-based discrimination, we might have a case. More importantly for my immediate situation, Robert clarified the boundaries of my non-compete agreement and intellectual property rights. The non-compete prevented me from working for competitors, but it didn't restrict my right to protect my own intellectual property or respond to attempts by former employers to misuse my work. If Pinnacle tried to claim ownership of methodologies or processes I had developed independently, I would have grounds to defend myself. The intellectual property research revealed fascinating possibilities. Many of the security protocols and system architectures I had developed were essentially my own creations, built over years of independent research and innovation. While Pinnacle owned the implementations within their systems, the underlying methodologies and design principles were arguably my intellectual property. During our second meeting, Robert and I discussed the company's financial vulnerabilities. This wasn't about planning anything malicious. It was about understanding the leverage dynamics if legal action became necessary. Pinnacle Financial was in the middle of negotiating a major merger with Continental Banking Group, a deal worth approximately $500 million that would significantly expand their market presence. Merger deals of this magnitude require extensive due diligence, Robert explained. Any operational instabilities or system reliability concerns could derail negotiations or significantly impact valuation. Companies pay millions for technology audits during these transactions specifically to identify potential risks. The timing of my termination suddenly made more sense. Derek had likely wanted to clean house before the merger talks intensified, removing older employees who might be seen as liabilities during the integration process. But in his eagerness to present a modernized management team to potential partners, he had created a much larger operational risk than he realized. My research into the merger timeline revealed that Continental Banking Group was conducting their final due diligence review over the next 6 weeks, with a decision expected by early May. System stability and technological infrastructure would be major evaluation criteria, since Continental planned to integrate Pinnacle's customer base into their own platforms within 18 months of the acquisition. This information completely changed my perspective on the situation. Derek hadn't just fired me to satisfy his ego or implement his modernization agenda. He had done it as part of positioning the company for sale. My 25 years of dedicated service had been sacrificed to make the company more attractive to potential buyers who might view experienced employees as expensive liabilities rather than valuable assets. The financial dependence research was equally revealing. Pinnacle's annual technology budget was approximately $15 million, but their actual dependency on smooth system operations was worth far more. Every day of system downtime cost them an estimated $200,000 in lost transactions, customer service problems, and regulatory compliance issues. A major system failure during the merger evaluation period could cost them the entire deal. Robert's analysis of similar cases provided additional context. He showed me examples of other technology professionals who had been terminated and subsequently hired back as consultants at premium rates when their former employers realized the extent of their dependency. In one case, a network administrator had been fired and rehired within 6 months at triple his previous salary after a series of system failures that cost the company millions. The key, Robert emphasized, is documentation and patience. If they experience problems related to systems you designed, and they approach you for help, you'll be in a strong negotiating position, but you cannot initiate any actions that could be construed as sabotage or malicious interference. This advice crystallized my strategy. I wouldn't need to do anything active to demonstrate my value. The systems I had built were complex enough that problems would emerge naturally as Kevin and his team encountered situations they weren't prepared to handle. My role would simply be to wait for reality to assert itself and be ready to respond when they inevitably realized their mistake. The legal consultation notes became my roadmap for the next phase of this situation. I now understood the boundaries of what I could and couldn't do, the timeline pressures Pinnacle was facing, and the financial stakes involved in their operational stability. Armed with this knowledge, I could develop a strategy that was both legally sound and strategically effective. That evening, I sat in my home office with a blank notebook and began developing what I would later think of as my master plan for strategic justice. This wasn't about revenge in the traditional sense. It was about ensuring that Pinnacle Financial experienced the natural consequences of their decision to discard institutional knowledge and mistreat a loyal employee. My personal journal entry from that night captured my mindset. They want to learn the hard way about the value of experience and expertise. I'm going to give them that education, but I'll do it legally, ethically, and with surgical precision. They fired the architect of their systems. Now they'll discover what happens when the architect is no longer there to prevent structural failures. The beauty of my situation was that I didn't need to actively sabotage anything. The systems I had built were robust and reliable, but they were also complex and interdependent in ways that only I fully understood. Problems would emerge naturally as Kevin and his team encountered situations they weren't prepared for, maintenance cycles they didn't understand, and system quirks that required institutional knowledge to resolve. My strategy would unfold in carefully planned phases, each designed to demonstrate a different aspect of my irreplaceability while maintaining complete legal protection. Phase 1 would focus on identifying vulnerabilities in systems only I knew about. Over 25 years, I had implemented numerous custom solutions and workarounds that weren't documented in standard procedures. These weren't security flaws or poor practices. They were sophisticated adaptations to unique business requirements, but they required ongoing attention and occasional manual intervention to function properly. For example, the primary database server had a memory leak issue that I had been managing for 3 years through a specific restart sequence performed during low traffic periods. The problem was hardware-related and would require expensive equipment replacement to fix permanently, but my manual workaround had prevented any service disruptions. Kevin knew about the restart procedure, but he didn't understand the timing, requirements, or the warning signs that indicated when intervention was necessary. Phase 2 would involve strategic timing to maximize impact during the merger evaluation period. Continental Banking Group would be conducting their technology assessment in early April, making any system instabilities during that time frame particularly damaging to Pinnacle's prospects. I wouldn't cause these problems, but I could ensure that my absence was felt most acutely when the stakes were highest. The network monitoring systems would be crucial during this phase. I had configured them to alert the IT staff about developing issues, but interpreting those alerts required understanding the patterns and correlations that I had learned over years of experience. Kevin might see the warning signs, but without my knowledge of what they actually meant, he would likely misinterpret their significance until problems became critical. Phase 3 would focus on the disaster recovery procedures that I had never fully documented. These weren't intentional omissions. They were the result of 25 years of accumulated knowledge about how to handle unusual situations and system failures. When major problems occurred, and they inevitably would, Kevin's team would discover that their training had prepared them for routine maintenance but not for crisis management. The most powerful aspect of my plan was its complete legality. I wouldn't be accessing their systems, interfering with their operations, or violating any confidentiality agreements. I would simply be allowing the natural consequences of their decision to play out, while positioning myself to respond when they realized their mistake. I also planned to document everything meticulously. Every system failure they experienced, every problem they couldn't solve, every indication that they needed expertise they had dismissed, all of it would be recorded, with timestamps and details. This documentation would serve multiple purposes: legal protection if they tried to blame me for their problems, evidence for potential wrongful termination claims, and leverage for future negotiations. The ethical considerations were important to me. I had no desire to harm innocent employees or customers who had nothing to do with my termination. My goal was to ensure that Derek Walsh and the senior leadership who had supported this decision experienced appropriate consequences for their poor judgment. The problems I was anticipating would be operational headaches and financial losses, not safety issues or customer data breaches. Part of my strategy involved establishing an alternative income stream that would demonstrate my continued value in the industry, while Pinnacle struggled with the consequences of my absence. I began reaching out to my professional network, letting colleagues know about my availability for consulting work. The response was immediate and gratifying. Several organizations had been trying to implement Pinnacle protocol-style security measures and were eager to work with the person who had developed them. The timeline I projected was optimistic but realistic. Based on my knowledge of the systems and the merger evaluation schedule, I estimated that significant problems would begin emerging within 2 to 3 weeks of my departure. The first issues would be minor but troubling: system slowdowns, intermittent connectivity problems, and monitoring alerts that Kevin's team couldn't explain. By week 4 to 6 during the critical merger evaluation period, more serious problems would likely surface as the systems encountered situations that required my specific expertise to resolve. This was when Pinnacle would begin to understand the true cost of their decision to prioritize politics over competence. The final phase of my plan involved being ready to respond when they inevitably reached out for help. I would negotiate from a position of strength with clear documentation of their needs and my value. The terms would include not just financial compensation, but also public acknowledgement of my contributions and assurance that similar mistreatment wouldn't happen to other employees. As I finished outlining my strategy that night, I felt a sense of calm determination that had been missing since my termination. I wasn't plotting revenge, I was planning justice. Pinnacle Financial was about to receive a very expensive education about the importance of treating experienced employees with respect and the dangerous consequences of corporate arrogance. The first indication that my predictions were accurate came exactly 18 days after my termination. I was in my home office working on a consulting proposal for a regional credit union when my phone rang. The caller ID showed the number for Pinnacle's main IT help desk, a number I had once answered myself during my early years with the company. "Mr. Chen?" The voice was young and nervous. "This is David from Pinnacle IT. I know you don't work here anymore, but we're having some issues with the primary server cluster, and Kevin thought maybe you could give us some quick advice." I politely declined to provide free consulting services to the company that had terminated me, but I was curious about the nature of their problems. David, clearly frustrated and probably violating company policy by calling me, explained that they were experiencing intermittent system slowdowns during peak business hours. The monitoring systems were showing unusual memory usage patterns, but Kevin couldn't identify the source of the problem. After ending the call, I opened my personal documentation files and found the system error log template I had created years earlier. This would be my method of tracking Pinnacle's operational difficulties, not through any unauthorized access to their systems, but through information that would inevitably become public as their problems escalated. The memory usage issue David described was exactly what I had anticipated. The primary database server's hardware-related memory leak, which I had been managing through carefully timed restart procedures, was beginning to affect system performance. Without my intervention, the memory usage would gradually increase throughout each day until it reached critical levels that triggered automatic system protections and slowdowns. Kevin knew about the restart procedure I had taught him, but he didn't understand the subtle warning signs that indicated when intervention was necessary. The monitoring system would show elevated memory usage, but interpreting those readings required knowledge of the normal fluctuation patterns and the specific thresholds that indicated developing problems. Over the next week, I began hearing about Pinnacle's difficulties through my professional network. The financial services technology community is relatively small, and system problems at major institutions don't stay secret for long. Colleagues mentioned hearing about technical difficulties at Pinnacle during industry conference calls and professional meetings. The first major incident occurred during the morning rush of transaction processing, when customer deposits and withdrawals typically peak. The system slowdowns that had been intermittent became severe enough to affect customer service, with branch locations reporting significant delays in account access and transaction processing. The automatic failover systems I had designed prevented complete outages, but customers were experiencing 30-60-second delays that made normal banking operations frustratingly slow. Kevin's team tried to address the problem by implementing additional memory management procedures, but without understanding the underlying hardware issue, their solutions were ineffective. They added more system monitoring, adjusted memory allocation parameters, and even performed emergency restarts, but the problems continued to recur with increasing frequency. What made this particularly damaging was the timing. Continental Banking Group was scheduled to begin their on-site technology evaluation the following week, and Pinnacle needed their systems running flawlessly to demonstrate operational stability. Instead, they were dealing with unexplained performance issues that their current IT team couldn't resolve. I learned about Derek's growing frustration through Sarah, who maintained friendships with several Pinnacle employees despite my termination. According to her sources, Derek was furious about the timing of the technical problems and had held several emergency meetings demanding explanations and solutions. He had apparently made comments about the coincidence of system issues starting shortly after my departure, but couldn't explain why a supposedly obsolete employee's absence would cause problems with modernized systems. The situation escalated when a major client, Meridian Investment Group, called to complain about transaction delays that were affecting their daily operations. Meridian managed over $2 billion in assets through Pinnacle's systems, and their account represented nearly 15% of Pinnacle's total revenue. When their portfolio managers couldn't access real-time account information due to system slowdowns, they threatened to move their business to a more reliable financial services provider. Kevin's desperation became apparent when he began calling former Pinnacle employees who had worked with me, trying to find someone who might have additional knowledge about the systems. Most of these colleagues contacted me to ask about the situation, and I confirmed that Kevin was dealing with issues that required specific expertise about our custom implementations. The first system error log entry I documented was timestamped at 2:47 p.m. on April 3rd, when the memory usage reached critical levels and triggered emergency protocols that automatically restricted non-essential system access. This wasn't a failure or crash. It was exactly what the systems were designed to do to protect data integrity when operating parameters exceeded safe limits, but it resulted in significant service disruptions during peak business hours, affecting hundreds of customers and generating dozens of complaint calls. By the end of that first week of serious problems, Pinnacle's IT help desk had logged over 200 customer complaints related to system slowdowns and transaction delays. The customer service department was fielding angry calls from business clients who couldn't access their accounts efficiently, and branch managers were reporting significant productivity losses due to the technical difficulties. Derek's political position was becoming increasingly precarious. The technical problems he had promised to solve through modernization were actually getting worse under his leadership. The expensive young talent he had hired to replace outdated employees like me were proving unable to handle the complex realities of managing mission-critical financial systems. Most satisfying to me was the emerging recognition among Pinnacle employees that these problems hadn't existed when I was managing the systems. The same colleagues who had watched silently during my termination were now privately acknowledging that the company had made a serious mistake. The institutional knowledge they had taken for granted was proving to be irreplaceable. The second wave of system failures began during the third week of April, just as Continental Banking Group's technical evaluation team arrived for their on-site assessment. What had started as intermittent slowdowns during peak hours escalated into more serious operational disruptions that Kevin's team couldn't predict or prevent. The catalyst was a routine software update that Kevin approved without fully understanding its implications for our custom security protocols. The update was from a reputable vendor and appeared straightforward, but it conflicted with modifications I had made years earlier to accommodate Pinnacle's specific regulatory requirements. The result was a cascade of authentication failures that affected customer login systems and internal database access. I learned about the escalation through multiple sources. First, my consulting client at Regional Credit Union mentioned hearing about major technical difficulties at Pinnacle during an industry conference call. Then Sarah's former colleagues began reaching out with increasingly detailed accounts of the chaos unfolding at the company. The authentication failures were particularly problematic because they affected both customer-facing systems and internal operations. Branch employees couldn't access customer accounts efficiently, online banking users were experiencing login errors, and the mobile banking app was generating thousands of error messages. Most critically, the failures were occurring unpredictably, making it impossible for Kevin's team to implement effective workarounds. What made this situation devastating was the presence of Continental Banking Group's evaluation team. They had arrived expecting to assess stable, reliable systems that would integrate smoothly with their existing infrastructure. Instead, they were witnessing real-time evidence of operational instability and inadequate technical support. The client complaint letter that would later become crucial evidence arrived on April 18th. Harrison and Associates, a wealth management firm that had been with Pinnacle for over 15 years, sent a formal notice threatening to terminate their relationship due to repeated system failures that were affecting their ability to serve their own clients. The letter detailed specific incidents where transaction delays and login failures had cost them business opportunities and damaged their reputation with high-net-worth customers. We cannot continue to risk our clients' trust on systems that appear to be deteriorating rather than improving, the letter stated. If these technical issues are not resolved immediately, we will have no choice but to transfer our $800 million in managed assets to a more reliable financial services provider. This wasn't just a customer complaint. It was a potential financial catastrophe. Harrison and Associates represented nearly 20% of Pinnacle's assets under management, and losing them would significantly impact the company's valuation during merger negotiations. The timing couldn't have been worse, with Continental's team actively evaluating Pinnacle's customer retention rates and operational stability. Kevin's desperation became increasingly apparent as he began reaching out to anyone who might have knowledge about our systems. He contacted retired Pinnacle employees, former contractors, and even vendors who had worked on installations years earlier. The consensus from everyone he spoke with was the same. The systems were too complex and customized for anyone except me to fully understand and maintain. The technical problems were compounding in ways that revealed the interconnected nature of the infrastructure I had built. The authentication failures were causing increased load on backup systems, which triggered memory management issues, which led to performance degradation, which caused timeout errors, which generated automatic retry attempts, which further increased system load. Kevin's team was fighting multiple fires simultaneously without understanding how they were all connected. Derek's political position deteriorated rapidly as board members began questioning his decision-making and competence. The modernization initiative that was supposed to demonstrate his leadership capability was instead showcasing his poor judgment and lack of understanding about the company's operational requirements. Several board members who had initially supported Derek's changes were now privately expressing doubts about his continued leadership. The situation reached a crisis point when Continental Banking Group's lead technical evaluator, Dr. Sarah Martinez, requested a meeting with Pinnacle's senior IT leadership to discuss the ongoing system issues. This wasn't part of the standard due diligence process. It was an emergency session triggered by their concerns about operational stability. During that meeting, which I learned about through my network of industry contacts, Kevin was unable to provide satisfactory explanations for the system failures or present a credible plan for resolution. When Dr. Martinez asked about disaster recovery procedures and system documentation, Kevin had to admit that critical knowledge about the infrastructure had been lost when key personnel departed the company. The most damaging revelation came when Dr. Martinez asked about the Pinnacle Protocol security framework that had been one of the primary attractions for Continental's interest in the merger. Kevin couldn't adequately explain how the system functioned or demonstrate its effectiveness because he didn't understand the underlying principles and implementation details that I had developed. Continental's evaluation team extended their assessment timeline and requested additional documentation about system architecture, maintenance procedures, and technical support capabilities. These were exactly the areas where Pinnacle's knowledge gaps were most apparent, and Kevin's team couldn't provide the detailed technical information that sophisticated buyers expect during major acquisitions. By the end of April, Pinnacle had logged over 500 customer complaints related to system issues, lost 2 major commercial clients, and faced serious questions from potential merger partners about their operational competence. The company that had fired me to demonstrate their commitment to modernization was instead demonstrating their dependence on the expertise they had dismissed. The irony wasn't lost on me that Derek's attempt to impress Continental Banking Group with a younger, more dynamic leadership team had instead highlighted the company's fundamental lack of technical understanding and institutional knowledge. His strategic vision was being exposed as corporate arrogance that prioritized appearances over competence. The emergency board meeting was called for May 2nd, just 6 weeks after my termination, and in the middle of what should have been final merger negotiations with Continental Banking Group. The meeting minutes, which I would later obtain through my attorney during discovery proceedings, painted a picture of corporate panic and finger-pointing at the highest levels of Pinnacle Financial. Board Chairman William Hartley opened the meeting by addressing what he called the unprecedented operational crisis that threatens our most significant business opportunity in decades. The technical difficulties that had started as minor inconveniences were now costing the company an estimated $50,000 per day in lost productivity, customer service issues, and emergency consulting fees. Derek's presentation to the board was a masterpiece of deflection and excuse-making. According to the minutes, he blamed the problems on legacy system vulnerabilities, inadequate documentation from previous IT management, and the inherent challenges of modernizing outdated infrastructure. He never once acknowledged that firing the person who had designed and maintained those systems might have been a contributing factor. The board members weren't buying his explanations. Director Margaret Singh pointed out that the systems had been functioning flawlessly until Derek's modernization changes began. Director Robert Chen, no relation to me despite the shared surname, questioned why critical system knowledge hadn't been properly documented and transferred before making personnel changes. The most damaging moment came when Derek was asked about the timeline for resolving the current issues. He couldn't provide a credible estimate because Kevin's team still didn't understand the root causes of most problems. They were essentially playing whack-a-mole with symptoms while the underlying issues remained unaddressed. Continental Banking Group had officially requested a 30-day extension of their evaluation period, citing concerns about operational stability and technical competence that needed additional assessment. This was corporate speak for, "We're having serious doubts about this deal." The merger that had been valued at $500 million was now in serious jeopardy, and every day of continued technical problems reduced Pinnacle's negotiating position and potential valuation. The financial bleeding was becoming severe. In addition to the daily operational costs, Pinnacle had hired 3 different consulting firms to assess their technical problems. These consultants were charging premium rates for emergency services, and none of them had been able to provide solutions that addressed the core issues. The consulting fees alone had exceeded $200,000 in just 4 weeks. Customer defections were accelerating. After Harrison and Associates followed through on their threat to transfer their assets, 2 other major clients announced similar intentions. The common theme in all departure notifications was lack of confidence in Pinnacle's technical stability and operational competence. These weren't just revenue losses. They were public relations disasters that damaged the company's reputation throughout the financial services industry. The board meeting minutes revealed the depth of Derek's desperation and growing isolation. When Director Singh suggested that the company should consider bringing back experienced personnel who understood the systems, Derek initially resisted, claiming that returning to outdated approaches would undermine our modernization strategy. The other board members made it clear that they cared more about operational stability than Derek's ego. The pressure on Derek intensified when Continental Banking Group's Dr. Martinez sent a formal letter outlining specific technical concerns that needed to be addressed before merger negotiations could proceed. The letter was essentially a technical competency test that Kevin's team couldn't pass. They needed to demonstrate mastery of system architecture, security protocols, disaster recovery procedures, and maintenance methodologies that were beyond their current capabilities. Derek's position became increasingly untenable When several key employees began expressing no confidence in his leadership, the branch managers were dealing with daily customer complaints and operational inefficiencies. The customer service department was overwhelmed with technical support calls they couldn't resolve. Even Derek's own hired staff began questioning decisions that had led to the current crisis. The most telling indicator of Derek's desperation was his attempt to contact me directly. He called my personal phone on May 5th, trying to present the EU outreach as a consulting opportunity rather than an admission of failure. I let the call go to voicemail and saved the message as documentation of their recognition that they needed my expertise. Marcus, this is Derek Walsh from Pinnacle. I hope you're doing well. We're exploring some consulting arrangements for specialized technical support, and I thought you might be interested in discussing possibilities. Please call me back when you have a chance. The voicemail was carefully worded to avoid admitting fault or desperation, but the subtext was clear. The company that had terminated me for being obsolete was now seeking my help to resolve problems that their modern approach couldn't handle. Sarah's former colleagues provided additional insights into the internal dynamics at Pinnacle. Employee morale was at an all-time low, with many staff members openly questioning Derek's competence and the wisdom of the personnel changes he had implemented. The IT department was working excessive hours trying to manage problems they didn't understand, and several experienced employees were updating their resumes and exploring opportunities elsewhere. The situation had reached a tipping point where Derek's continued leadership was becoming a greater liability than the technical problems themselves. Board members were privately discussing the need for immediate changes in senior management to salvage the Continental merger and restore operational stability. By mid-May, Pinnacle Financial was hemorrhaging money, losing customers, facing potential merger cancellation, and dealing with a leadership crisis that Derek's arrogance and poor judgment had created. The company that had fired me to demonstrate their commitment to modern management was instead demonstrating the catastrophic consequences of prioritizing politics over competence. The defining moment came on May 15th, during what was supposed to be the final technical demonstration for Continental Banking Group's merger evaluation. Instead of showcasing Pinnacle's technological capabilities, it became a catastrophic public failure that would ultimately destroy the deal and Derek's career. Continental's evaluation team had requested a live demonstration of Pinnacle's core banking systems, security protocols, and disaster recovery procedures. This was standard practice for major acquisitions. Potential buyers needed to see the systems functioning under realistic conditions and understand the technical infrastructure they would be inheriting. Kevin had spent weeks preparing for this presentation, working with expensive consultants to develop a demonstration script that would highlight the system's capabilities while avoiding the problematic areas they couldn't fully explain. The plan was to show Continental's team how Pinnacle's infrastructure could integrate with their existing platforms and support the combined entity's operations. The presentation began at 9 a.m. in Pinnacle's main conference room, with Derek, Kevin, and 3 senior consultants presenting to Continental's technical evaluation team. According to my sources who witnessed the disaster, everything went wrong in the most spectacular fashion possible. 20 minutes into the demonstration, the primary authentication server experienced a critical failure that cascaded through multiple system components. Customer login screens began displaying error messages, internal databases became inaccessible, and the real-time transaction processing systems slowed to a crawl. What should have been a showcase of technological sophistication became a real-time demonstration of operational incompetence. Kevin and his team scrambled to implement emergency procedures, but they were working from incomplete documentation and didn't understand the interdependencies that I had built into the system architecture. Their attempts to restore service actually made the problems worse, triggering additional failures in backup systems that were designed to prevent exactly this type of cascade effect. The most humiliating moment came when Dr. Martinez asked Kevin to explain the disaster recovery procedures for the specific type of failure they were experiencing. Kevin had to admit that he didn't fully understand the protocols, and that the person who had designed them was no longer with the company. In front of potential merger partners worth $500 million, Pinnacle's senior IT leadership acknowledged that they couldn't manage their own systems. Continental's team watched in stunned silence as Pinnacle's technical staff struggled for over an hour to restore basic functionality. Customer service phones were ringing constantly with complaints from users who couldn't access their accounts. Branch locations were reporting that they couldn't process routine transactions. The company's technological infrastructure was essentially paralyzed during the most important business presentation in their history. Derek's attempts to minimize the situation and deflect blame only made things worse. He suggested that the problems were coincidental and not representative of normal operations. But Dr. Martinez pointed out that they had been documenting similar issues throughout their evaluation period. This wasn't a random failure. It was evidence of systematic problems with Pinnacle's technical capabilities. The merger cancellation notice arrived by email at 4:30 p.m. that same day. Continental Banking Group's formal communication was diplomatically worded, but devastating in its implications. After careful evaluation of operational capabilities and technical infrastructure, Continental Banking Group has determined that the proposed merger does not align with our strategic requirements at this time. The real reasons were spelled out in more detail in Dr. Martinez's confidential report to Continental's board, which I would later obtain through industry contacts. She wrote, "Pinnacle Financial lacks the technical competence and institutional knowledge necessary to manage their existing systems reliably. The departure of key personnel has created operational vulnerabilities that pose unacceptable risks for integration with our platforms. The financial impact was immediate and severe. Pinnacle's stock price dropped 23% in after-hours trading as news of the canceled merger spread through the financial community. The company that had been valued at $500 million as a merger target was suddenly worth significantly less as an independent entity struggling with operational problems. Derek's position became completely untenable when the board received Continental's detailed feedback about the technical demonstration. Board members who had supported his modernization initiative were now faced with undeniable evidence that his decisions had cost the company hundreds of millions in potential value and damaged their reputation throughout the industry. The employee exodus began almost immediately. Several senior staff members who had been considering other opportunities decided that Pinnacle's prospects were too uncertain to justify staying. The IT department was particularly affected, with 3 technicians giving notice within a week of the merger cancellation. They couldn't handle the stress of managing systems they didn't understand while being blamed for problems they couldn't solve. Customer defections accelerated as word spread about Pinnacle's technical difficulties and canceled merger. Business clients who had been considering the Continental partnership as a positive development now viewed Pinnacle as a struggling institution with uncertain prospects. The company lost an additional $1.2 billion in managed assets during the 2 weeks following the merger cancellation. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on anyone who understood the technical details. The system failures that had destroyed the merger opportunity were entirely preventable if the company had maintained the institutional knowledge and expertise they had dismissed. The modernization that was supposed to make Pinnacle more attractive to potential partners had instead made them a cautionary tale about the importance of technical competence. Derek's desperate attempt to contact me again came on May 18th, 3 days after the merger cancellation. This time, his voicemail was noticeably less confident and more urgent. "Marcus, I hope you're available to discuss some immediate consulting opportunities. We have some technical challenges that could really benefit from your expertise. Please call me as soon as possible." The transformation from arrogant dismissal to desperate pleading had taken exactly 8 weeks. The company that had fired me for being obsolete was now begging for my help to fix problems that their modern approach had created. The strategic justice I had planned was unfolding even more effectively than I had anticipated. Derek Walsh's resignation letter landed on my desk through my attorney on May 22nd, exactly 10 weeks after my termination. The document was a masterpiece of corporate face-saving, carefully worded to present his departure as a strategic decision to pursue new opportunities, rather than an acknowledgement of catastrophic failure. After careful consideration of my career goals and the evolving needs of Pinnacle Financial, Derek had written, "I have decided to transition to new challenges that will allow me to continue developing innovative approaches to financial services management." The resignation was effective immediately, with no mention of the merger cancellation, system failures, or operational crisis that had defined his brief tenure as CEO. But the real story was told in the accompanying board resolution that accepted his resignation. The document, which I obtained through discovery proceedings in my subsequent legal action, revealed the board's assessment of Derek's performance and the desperate situation he was leaving behind. Board Chairman William Hartley's internal memo was brutally honest about the scope of Derek's failures. The modernization initiative implemented under Mr. Walsh's leadership has resulted in operational instabilities, significant client losses, and the cancellation of our most important strategic opportunity. The company requires immediate technical expertise to address system failures and restore client confidence. Derek wasn't the only casualty of the crisis he had created. Jennifer Mills, the HR director who had participated in my termination, was also removed from her position for what the board termed inadequate assessment of operational risks during personnel transitions. Kevin Morrison, my supposed replacement, was demoted to a junior technical role after admitting that he couldn't manage the systems he had been hired to modernize. The board's emergency session on May 20th had been dedicated entirely to damage control and survival strategy. According to the meeting minutes, they faced a stark choice: find someone who could restore operational stability quickly, or risk complete collapse of customer confidence and potential regulatory intervention. The regulatory concerns were particularly serious. The Office of the Comptroller of the Currency had received multiple complaints about Pinnacle's service disruptions and was considering a formal investigation into the company's operational competence. Banking regulators take system stability very seriously, and repeated failures can trigger enforcement actions that devastate an institution's reputation and business prospects. 3 other senior executives who had supported Derek's modernization initiative were also removed or demoted. The board was conducting what amounted to a complete management purge, eliminating anyone associated with the decisions that had led to the current crisis. The message was clear. The company was acknowledging that Derek's entire approach had been fundamentally flawed. The search for interim leadership revealed the full extent of Pinnacle's desperation. They needed someone who could immediately address the technical problems, restore customer confidence, and rebuild relationships with potential partners. More importantly, they needed someone who understood their systems well enough to prevent further failures while developing long-term solutions. Chairman Hartley's phone call to my attorney came on May 23rd. He requested a meeting to discuss consulting opportunities that would benefit both parties. The careful language couldn't disguise the fact that Pinnacle Financial was essentially surrendering and asking for help from the person they had dismissed as obsolete. The preliminary discussions revealed the scope of their desperation. They were prepared to offer me a consulting contract with complete authority over technical operations, unlimited budget for system improvements, and a daily rate that exceeded my previous annual salary when calculated over a full year. They also wanted me to serve as interim CTO while they conducted a comprehensive search for permanent leadership. The board's willingness to essentially hand me control of their entire technical operation demonstrated how completely Derek's modernization initiative had failed. The company that had fired me for being resistant to change was now begging me to implement whatever changes I deemed necessary to restore stability. Sarah and I spent several evenings discussing the offer and the implications of accepting it. The financial terms were extraordinarily generous. They were essentially paying me premium rates to fix problems that shouldn't have existed if they had treated me properly in the first place. But more than the money, this was an opportunity to demonstrate the value of experience and institutional knowledge that corporate arrogance had dismissed. The negotiation process was handled entirely through my attorney, Robert Chen, to maintain professional distance and ensure proper documentation of all agreements. Pinnacle's legal team was clearly operating under instructions to meet whatever reasonable terms I requested, as long as I was willing to help them salvage their operations. Primary demands were not financial, though the compensation package was substantial. I wanted public acknowledgement of my contributions to the company's technological infrastructure, formal recognition that my termination had been a mistake, and guarantees that other employees would not face similar mistreatment for political reasons. The apology letter that Hartley eventually agreed to send to all employees and clients was particularly satisfying. It acknowledged that personnel decisions made earlier this year did not adequately consider the importance of institutional knowledge and technical expertise, and that the company was committed to ensuring that experienced employees receive the respect and recognition their contributions deserve. The transformation from termination to recruitment had taken exactly 11 weeks. The obsolete employee, who had been escorted out by security, was now being courted as the company's potential savior. The strategic justice I had planned was complete. Pinnacle Financial had learned the hard way about the value of treating experienced employees with respect, but Derek's downfall was only the beginning of my vindication. The real satisfaction would come from demonstrating that the systems they had dismissed as outdated were actually sophisticated solutions that required expert knowledge to maintain and improve. The formal negotiation sessions began on May 25th in the conference room, where I had been terminated just 12 weeks earlier. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. The same table where Derek Walsh had handed me a termination letter was now where Pinnacle's board was essentially begging me to save their company. My consulting contract negotiations were handled with surgical precision. I had learned from Derek's mistakes about the importance of documentation, clear expectations, and protected authority. Every aspect of our agreement would be spelled out in detail to prevent future political maneuvering or attempts to undermine my position. The financial terms were extraordinary. Pinnacle agreed to pay me $2,500 per day for consulting services, with a minimum commitment of 120 days and potential extensions based on performance and need. This represented more than triple my previous annual salary, calculated over a full year. They also provided comprehensive liability insurance, full administrative support, and unlimited budget authority for technical improvements. But the non-financial terms were even more important to me. I demanded and received complete autonomy over all technical decisions, direct reporting to the board rather than through intermediate management, and the right to hire additional personnel without executive approval. This wasn't just a consulting arrangement. It was essentially granting me the authority that Derek had denied me during his tenure. The public apology component was crucial for both practical and symbolic reasons. Pinnacle's reputation in the industry had been damaged by their operational failures, but it could be further damaged by perceptions that they mistreated experienced employees. The company-wide email that Chairman Hartley sent on May 28th addressed both concerns. After careful review of recent operational challenges, Hartley wrote to all employees and major clients, "The board has determined that personnel decisions made earlier this year did not adequately consider the critical importance of institutional knowledge and technical expertise. We deeply regret any negative impact these decisions may have had on our operations and our valued employees." The email continued, "Effective immediately, Marcus Chen will be returning to Pinnacle Financial as Senior Technology Consultant, with full authority to address our current technical challenges and implement improvements to ensure long-term operational stability. We are grateful for Mr. Chen's willingness to assist the company during this critical period." This wasn't just an apology. It was a public admission that firing me had been a mistake and that the company recognized my value. The email was sent to over 500 employees, 200 major clients, and key industry contacts. Within hours, the news was circulating throughout the financial services technology community. The reaction from Pinnacle employees was immediate and overwhelmingly positive. Sarah shared messages from her former colleagues expressing relief that someone with real expertise was finally being brought in to address the technical problems. Many employees who had been considering leaving decided to stay, knowing that operational stability would be restored. Client reactions were equally important. Several major accounts that had been threatening to leave announced they would postpone their departures to see if the technical issues could be resolved. Harrison and Associates, which had already begun the process of transferring their assets, agreed to suspend their departure for 60 days to evaluate whether service improvements justified remaining with Pinnacle. My first day back at Pinnacle on June 1st was surreal. The same security guard who had escorted me out in March was now welcoming me back and providing me with enhanced access credentials that exceeded what I had possessed as a regular employee. My new temporary office was actually larger and better equipped than my previous workspace. The briefing session with Kevin Morrison and the remaining IT staff revealed the full extent of the damage Derek's modernization had caused. System documentation was incomplete. Critical procedures had been modified without proper testing, and several security protocols had been compromised by changes that prioritized convenience over protection. Kevin's relief at my return was palpable. He had been struggling for months with systems he didn't fully understand, facing constant pressure to solve problems that required expertise he didn't possess. During our first technical review, he admitted that he had been working 16-hour days trying to manage issues that would have been routine maintenance under my previous management. The systematic restoration process I implemented demonstrated the difference between experience and mere technical competence. Within the first week, I had identified and resolved the authentication server issues that had plagued the company for months. The memory leak problems that had caused daily performance degradation were fixed through proper hardware configuration. changes that Kevin's team hadn't understood. Most importantly, I began implementing comprehensive documentation and training procedures to ensure that critical knowledge would never again be concentrated in a single person. The goal wasn't just to fix current problems, but to create sustainable systems that could be maintained by competent technicians even if I wasn't available. The board's willingness to grant me unprecedented authority reflected their recognition that technical expertise couldn't be replaced by political maneuvering or corporate buzzwords. They had learned at enormous cost that managing complex systems requires deep understanding and experience that can't be quickly acquired or easily replaced. The consulting arrangement also included provisions for my potential return as a permanent employee, but with significant protections against the kind of political persecution I had experienced under Derek's leadership. Any future position would include board-level reporting, protected tenure, and decision-making authority that couldn't be undermined by management changes. By the end of my first week back, Pinnacle's system performance had improved dramatically. Customer complaints had dropped by 80%, and employee morale was visibly recovering. The company that had been hemorrhaging money and clients was beginning to stabilize, demonstrating the value of the expertise they had so carelessly dismissed. The systematic restoration of Pinnacle's technological infrastructure over the following months was both professionally satisfying and personally vindicating. Each problem I solved, each system I optimized, and each crisis I prevented served as evidence of the expertise that Derek Walsh had so foolishly dismissed. The process began with a comprehensive audit of all systems modifications that had been implemented during my absence. Kevin's team had made dozens of changes based on vendor recommendations, consultant advice, and Derek's modernization mandates, but most of these modifications had been implemented without understanding their impact on the integrated architecture I had designed. The most critical issue was the authentication server configuration that had caused the catastrophic failure during Continental Banking Group's evaluation. Derek's team had modified security protocols to make them more user-friendly, but these changes had introduced vulnerabilities and instabilities that I would never have approved. Restoring proper security configurations required rolling back weeks of modifications and re-implementing protections with updated methodologies. Within 2 weeks of my return, system performance had improved so dramatically that employees were commenting on the difference. Login times that had stretched to over a minute during the crisis period were back down to 3 to 5 seconds. Database queries that had been timing out regularly were processing smoothly. The constant stream of customer complaints about technical difficulties slowed to a trickle. The company-wide apology email that Chairman Hartley sent on June 15th was perhaps the most satisfying document I received during this entire experience. Addressed to all employees, clients, and key industry contacts, it represented a complete vindication of my contributions and an acknowledgement of the company's mistakes. Over the past 3 months, Hartley wrote, Pinnacle Financial has experienced operational challenges that highlighted the critical importance of institutional knowledge and technical expertise. We are pleased to announce that these issues have been comprehensively addressed through the engagement of senior technology consultant Marcus Chen, whose deep understanding of our systems has restored the stability and reliability our clients deserve. The email continued with what amounted to a public apology for my treatment. Mr. Chen's contributions to Pinnacle's technological infrastructure over 25 years created the foundation for our growth and success. We deeply regret that previous management decisions did not adequately recognize the value of his expertise, and we are committed to ensuring that experienced employees receive the respect and recognition their contributions deserve. This wasn't just corporate damage control. It was a public admission that firing me had been a serious mistake that had cost the company millions of dollars and damaged relationships with clients and partners. The email was forwarded throughout the financial services industry, serving as both an apology to me and a cautionary tale for other companies about the importance of valuing institutional knowledge. The client retention efforts were remarkably successful once system stability was restored. Harrison and Associates, which had been in the process of transferring their $800 million in managed assets, decided to remain with Pinnacle after experiencing 2 months of flawless service. 3 other major clients who had initiated departure procedures also reversed their decisions, citing improved confidence in the company's operational competence. The training programs I implemented for Kevin's team and new hires were designed to prevent future knowledge concentration issues. I created comprehensive documentation for all critical procedures, established redundant expertise across multiple staff members, and implemented monitoring systems that would provide early warning of developing problems. The goal was to ensure that no single person's departure could again threaten the company's operational stability. Kevin Morrison proved to be an excellent student once he was relieved of the impossible pressure of managing systems he didn't understand. With proper training and comprehensive documentation, he developed into a competent administrator who could handle routine operations and identify when expert consultation was needed. His transformation from overwhelmed replacement to capable technician demonstrated that the problem hadn't been his competence, but Derek's unrealistic expectations and poor planning. The recognition I received during this period extended beyond Pinnacle to the broader financial services technology community. Industry publications began featuring articles about the importance of institutional knowledge and the risks of dismissing experienced personnel for political or cost-cutting reasons. I was invited to speak at conferences about system architecture, knowledge management, and the value of long-term technical expertise. The most gratifying aspect of the restoration process was watching Pinnacle's reputation recover within the industry. Companies that had been questioning the institution's stability and competence began viewing them as a cautionary tale with a positive ending, an organization that had learned from its mistakes and taken appropriate corrective action. Former colleagues who had watched my termination with silent concern now openly expressed their admiration for how I had handled the situation. Many admitted that they had known Derek's decision was wrong, but had felt powerless to intervene. My vindication served as encouragement for other experienced employees to advocate for proper recognition and respect. The financial recovery was equally impressive. Within 3 months of my return, Pinnacle had not only stopped losing clients but had begun attracting new business from organizations that were impressed by the company's technical competence and stability. The operational improvements I implemented actually enhanced the company's competitive position beyond where it had been before the crisis. By late summer, Pinnacle Financial was functioning better than it had in years, with improved systems, comprehensive documentation, well-trained staff, and restored client confidence. The company that had fired me for being obsolete had discovered that my expertise was not only current, but ahead of industry standards in many areas. By September 2024, 6 months after my termination and 3 months after my return as a consultant, Pinnacle Financial had not only recovered from Derek Walsh's disastrous modernization attempt, but had emerged stronger and more stable than before the crisis. The success of the restoration project led to an inevitable question. Would I consider returning as a permanent employee? The renewed employment offer that arrived on my desk in late September was unlike anything I had seen in my 25 years with the company. The position being offered was Chief Technology Officer, a C-level executive role that had never existed at Pinnacle before. The salary was 40% higher than my previous compensation, with equity participation, comprehensive benefits, and reporting directly to the board of directors. More importantly than the financial terms were the structural protections built into the offer. The CTO position would have guaranteed tenure protection, meaning I couldn't be terminated without board approval and documented cause. I would have complete authority over all technology decisions, unlimited budget for infrastructure improvements, and the right to hire and structure my own team without interference from other executives. The job description essentially codified everything I had been doing as a consultant, but with permanent status and long-term security. I would be responsible for all aspects of Pinnacle's technological infrastructure, with authority to implement whatever changes I deemed necessary to maintain competitive advantage and operational excellence. Chairman Hartley's personal letter accompanying the offer was both flattering and revealing. The events of the past year have demonstrated conclusively that Pinnacle's technological success depends on your expertise and leadership, he wrote. The board unanimously believes that offering you this position is not just appropriate recognition of your contributions, but essential for the company's long-term success. Sarah and I spent many evenings discussing the offer and its implications for our family's future. The financial security was attractive, and the professional recognition was gratifying after the humiliation of my termination, but we both understood that accepting the position would mean committing to Pinnacle for the remainder of my career, with all the risks that entailed. The decision ultimately came down to control and independence. As a consultant, I had complete flexibility to choose my projects, set my own schedule, and work with multiple clients. The success of my Pinnacle restoration had generated numerous consulting opportunities with other financial institutions that wanted to implement similar security protocols and system architectures. During my consulting period, I had worked with 3 other regional banks that were experiencing technology challenges similar to what Pinnacle had faced. These projects were professionally rewarding and financially lucrative, demonstrating that my expertise was valuable throughout the industry, not just at my former employer. The consulting firm I established, Chen Technology Solutions, was already generating more revenue than my previous Pinnacle salary. My client base included banks, credit unions, and financial services companies across the region, all seeking to benefit from the Pinnacle protocol approach to network security and system integration. The independence of consulting also protected me from the kind of political persecution I had experienced under Derek's leadership. As an external consultant, I could maintain professional relationships with clients while avoiding the internal politics and personality conflicts that had made my previous employment situation untenable. After careful consideration, I decided to decline Pinnacle's permanent employment offer while maintaining our consulting relationship. The decision was based on both practical and philosophical considerations. Practically, I was earning more money and enjoying greater flexibility as an independent consultant. Philosophically, I had learned the value of not being completely dependent on any single organization for my professional security. My response to Chairman Hartley was diplomatically worded but firm. While I am honored by the board's confidence and generous offer, I believe I can best serve Pinnacle's interests by continuing our current consulting arrangement. This structure allows me to provide specialized expertise when needed, while maintaining the objectivity and independence that have proven valuable during the restoration process. The consulting contract extension we negotiated provided for ongoing technical oversight and strategic planning, with defined periods of intensive engagement for major projects and system upgrades. This arrangement gave Pinnacle access to my expertise while allowing me to serve other clients and maintain my growing consulting practice. Pinnacle's acceptance of my decision to remain independent was itself a measure of how much the company had learned from Derek's mistakes. Rather than viewing my independence as rejection or disloyalty, they understood it as a mature business relationship that served both parties' interests effectively. The recognition I received as an independent consultant exceeded anything I had achieved as a Pinnacle employee. Industry publications featured articles about my work. Conference organizers invited me to speak about system architecture and institutional knowledge management, and other technology professionals sought my advice on career development and technical challenges. By the end of 2024, I was working with 8 different financial institutions across 3 states, helping them optimize their technological infrastructure and avoid the kind of problems that had nearly destroyed Pinnacle. My consulting firm had grown to include 2 associate consultants and was generating annual revenue that exceeded my previous employment income by more than 200%. The transformation from terminated employee to sought-after industry expert had taken less than a year, but it represented a fundamental shift in how I viewed my professional identity and value. I was no longer dependent on any single employer's recognition or protection. My expertise and reputation had created sustainable independence and financial security. As I sit in my home office today, exactly 1 year after Derek Walsh handed me that termination letter, I'm looking at the latest issue of Financial Technology Quarterly magazine. The cover story is titled, "The Marcus Chen Model: How Institutional Knowledge Became the Ultimate Competitive Advantage," and it features a detailed case study of Pinnacle Financial's crisis and recovery. The article describes how a systematic dismissal of experienced personnel nearly destroyed a major regional bank's technological infrastructure, and how the return of institutional expertise restored stability and competitive advantage within months. Reading about my story from an objective industry perspective is both surreal and deeply satisfying. The transformation has been more complete than I could have imagined when I first understood the scope of Pinnacle's dependency on my knowledge. What began as strategic justice for personal mistreatment evolved into a comprehensive demonstration of the value of experience, expertise, and institutional memory in an industry obsessed with modernization and cost-cutting. The lessons from this experience extend far beyond my personal vindication. Pinnacle Financial learned that technological competence can't be purchased or implemented through management consulting and buzzword-driven initiatives. Real expertise requires years of hands-on experience, deep understanding of complex systems, and the institutional knowledge that comes from building and maintaining infrastructure over time. Derek Walsh's fundamental mistake was believing that experience could be easily replaced by enthusiasm, and that institutional knowledge was less valuable than contemporary credentials. His modernization initiative prioritized appearances over competence, political relationships over technical expertise, and short-term cost savings over long-term operational stability. The financial cost of his misjudgment was staggering. Pinnacle spent over $2 million in consulting fees, emergency repairs, and crisis management during the months following my termination. They lost at least $50 million in potential merger value when Continental Banking Group canceled their acquisition. Customer defections and operational disruptions cost additional millions in revenue and reputation damage, but the human cost was equally significant. Kevin Morrison and his team spent months struggling with impossible responsibilities and unrealistic expectations. Other experienced employees lived in fear that they might be next on Derek's modernization chopping block. Client service representatives dealt with constant complaints about technical problems they couldn't explain or resolve. The broader industry has taken notice of Pinnacle's cautionary tale. Human resources conferences now feature sessions about the Pinnacle Protocol, not just my technical security framework, but the management approach that recognizes and protects institutional knowledge. Several major corporations have implemented policies specifically designed to prevent the kind of expertise loss that nearly destroyed Pinnacle. My own consulting practice has become a testament to the value of the knowledge that Derek dismissed as obsolete. Chen Technology Solutions now serves clients across multiple states, helping them optimize their infrastructure while avoiding the pitfalls of ill-considered modernization initiatives. The expertise that one company foolishly discarded has become the foundation for a thriving business that serves the entire industry. The personal satisfaction goes beyond financial success or professional recognition. This experience taught me about my own resilience and the importance of understanding my true value in the marketplace. For 25 years, I had allowed my identity to be defined by my employment with a single company. The termination forced me to recognize that my expertise was portable and valuable, independent of any particular employer. Sarah often remarks that I'm more confident and professionally satisfied now than I had been during my final years at Pinnacle. The stress of working under Derek's hostile management had been affecting my health and happiness in ways I hadn't fully recognized until I was free from that environment. The consulting practice allows me to work with clients who appreciate my expertise rather than resent it. The advice I give to other experienced professionals facing similar challenges is straightforward. Document your contributions, understand your value, and never allow corporate politics to make you doubt your worth. Age and experience are competitive advantages in fields that require deep knowledge and proven judgment. Companies that don't recognize this will learn the hard way, as Pinnacle did. For younger professionals, the lesson is equally important. Respect the experience and institutional knowledge of your colleagues, regardless of their age or educational background. The person you dismiss as old school may be the one whose expertise keeps your systems running and your company competitive. The technology industry's obsession with youth and disruption often overlooks the fundamental importance of operational competence and proven expertise. Innovation is valuable, but it must be built on a foundation of reliable systems and experienced judgment. The most successful organizations combine fresh thinking with institutional wisdom. Looking ahead, I'm optimistic about both my consulting practice and the industry's growing recognition of expertise value. The Marcus Chen model that Financial Technology Quarterly describes is becoming a template for other organizations seeking to balance innovation with operational stability. Pinnacle Financial continues to thrive under the systems and processes I restored and improved. Kevin Morrison has developed into an excellent technical manager under proper guidance and realistic expectations. The company's reputation has recovered completely, and they're now viewed as a case study in effective crisis management and organizational learning. Derek Walsh, according to industry sources, has struggled to find comparable employment since his departure from Pinnacle. The technology sector is small enough that his failures have become widely known, serving as a reminder that leadership requires more than credentials and buzzwords. As for me, I wake up each morning excited about the challenges and opportunities ahead. The expertise I've developed over 3 decades continues to grow and evolve, but now it serves multiple clients and contributes to industry-wide improvements rather than being confined to a single organization. The termination that seemed like A catastrophe turned out to be the catalyst for the most professionally rewarding period of my career. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is being forced to discover your true value in the marketplace. I'm grateful for the education, even if I wouldn't want to repeat the experience. Share your own workplace transformation stories in the comments below. I'd love to hear how other professionals have turned setbacks into comebacks and found their true value after facing corporate adversity.